Hello, UATV English is online and on the air. We have a special guest as usual. Our guest wears many hats and all of them are military, if you ask me. An author shortlisted for the Military Book of the Year by Military History Matters magazine. An expert in military capabilities, history, torture prevention and Air Force, Frank Ledwidge. Hello.
Good afternoon. Good evening, actually, for you.
Yeah. Good evening, indeed. So my question is torture prevention. Help me to understand one thing. So being a criminal barrister in Liverpool for 8 years must have given you a good chance to look deeper into human nature. A better chance than some of psychologists ever did, I believe. So I've seen what Russians did in Ukraine myself. I've been in butchers in pits in the ground, full of dead bodies, with their hands tied behind their backs and bullet holes in their heads. During my last trip to the front line, it was in Donbass, just a week ago, I talked to locals and they told me a story. When Russians overtook the place of Svatohirsk, it's a small town, they killed 2 Ukrainian civil guards and threw bodies out in the middle of a street and wouldn't let locals bury them remains for more than a month, which is a sort of psychological torture, no doubt, for the whole community. So Russians do terrible, unspeakable, evil, dire things in Ukraine. Is there any way to prevent this from happening here and now?
There's I should say the last prosecutor at Nuremberg was a fellow called Ben Ferenc. And Ben was, he died last year at the age of 103. And he was a great advocate for justice for war criminals, against all the odds, really. And he was asked on one occasion, what makes people, a similar question to you asked, what makes people do evil things? Are they evil? Are they monsters? Bearing in mind that Ben had, or Dr. Ferenc had, experience that puts any of ours, I think, in the shade. He'd landed at D-Day with the American army. He'd fought his way through the Battle of the Bulge, through the hedgerows of Normandy, and then ended his war in one of the Nazi concentration camps, seeing both what the guards did to the prisoners and the mess of that, and what the prisoners did to the guards afterwards. He'd seen the depths of evil. He then returned a couple of years later to prosecute at Nuremberg, and prosecuted what the groups called the Einsatzgruppen, who operated, amongst other places, of course, as you know, in Ukraine, murdering hundreds of thousands of mainly Jews. And he was asked, as I say, these must be monsters. How do you deal with them? He said, these aren't monsters. He said, these were, in the case of the leaders of the Einsatzgruppen, and these were men who were cultured. They believed in much the same things as we do. However, they nonetheless do terrible things. He said, we are all capable of these terrible things. I teach military ethics for British Armed Forces. Indeed, only yesterday I was lecturing officers from all over the world on this issue of military ethics, and I pointed out that the U.S. Marine Manual of Military Ethics points out that all of us are capable of ordering or indeed carrying out atrocities. So the question is, how do we stop this? How do we prevent it, as in that case, senior officers? So back to your point, these men who commit the atrocities you speak of, they're human beings. They have been permitted to do so. They've had their basest instincts encouraged and allowed to run riot. That's why we see this. They are, their military culture is, of course, self-evidently degenerate. I spent years in the Balkans dealing with such people and seeing the same things you've seen. And the same was the case there.
So it actually is the Kremlin responsibility, or it is the responsibility of the Russian nation in general, who was careless enough to got itself another tyrant.
Ultimately, the responsibility lies with the state in allowing or encouraging that kind of behaviour, especially in places like Bucha. I think on the battlefield, both sides are capable of atrocity and war crimes, just as our men and women, well, mainly men, are, or indeed the Americans or any other country. In that case, the atrocities are encouraged and condoned by their senior officers. In our cases, they tend to be not to be such, but to be the product of corrupted command or corrupted individuals. And I suspect it's a combination of all those factors in the case of Russian soldiers.
Indeed, it is certainly a combination. You're absolutely right. Thank you very much for your answer. My next answer, it will be, I mean, I have a lot of questions in terms of the question that I asked before previously. A very interesting conversation. I believe your expertise allows you to answer it more broadly, but we don't have enough time for that, but maybe next time. So my question now is F16, beautiful war machines, but now in 2 years of this war, and not back then when they were needed so. What difference these fighter jets are going to make for Ukraine today?
Great question, thank you. Let me give you the good, and then I'll give you the less good. So the good is that these are very capable aircraft. They are what we call fourth generation, I suspect.
It is.
They will be modified, or their avionics, their electronics will be modified to generation maybe halfway between 4.0 and 4.5. Okay, all that's jargon. What that basically means is they'll be able to take on reasonably equal terms most Russian aircraft, or indeed drones. Furthermore, of course, they'll be able to draw on Western supplies, Western logistics for these aircraft, spares to some extent, maintenance and repairs, which is vital. They will replace the very old and frankly outdated, to put them into the same framework, Generation 4 minus, really, aircraft that the Ukrainians already operate and have operated with very great skill and courage since the start of the war. But here's the downside. All of that is true. They will make a difference. First thing, though, they need to be part of a system. Aircraft themselves they look good, as you say, they're beautiful flying machines. They have a great record in combat, absolutely second to none, actually, say perhaps the F-15s, which are rather bigger, but unrivaled combat record. They are rather exquisite, though, so they require a great deal of maintenance. So we hear a lot about pilots, and frankly, I'm fed up of hearing about pilots. They will be basically trained or rudimentarily trained on this platform probably by the end of the year in reasonable numbers. What I want to hear more about is the basing, not locations, but the capability of the Ukrainians and their allies to be able to maintain these and base them. And of course, equally importantly, which is really getting into technical detail, is how they're going to use them. So just to finish on the answer on this note, it takes about 4 to 5 years to bring a squadron of 15 or 20 aircraft to real combat readiness, with all the logistics, all the avionics, electronics, control systems, ground crews, air crews, fully trained up on that platform to be combat effective. They will also need exercising and all the support that can possibly be had. So we're looking really into next year, at least, before they'll begin to be combat effective against the Russian Air Force.
So it still needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
Well, again, a lot of questions, and so not enough time for that. But so my next question is: as a military historian, can you try to assess the aftermath of this criminal war for Russia?
Yeah, for Russia, of course, much of this depends on the outcome, but candidly, I'll tell you, in the words, I think this is not controversial, excuse me now, they will be or highly likely to be far stronger than they were before the war, because they have energized their war industries and their war machine in a way that the West at the moment will not or cannot match. And so they are likely to be, certainly their army, as you know, is bigger than it was. They have exploited gaps in Western sanctions system, let's say, to be able to energize their production capabilities. And despite the huge casualties they've taken, they seem to have no problem in recruiting replacements. However, I think we are starting to get the message in the West that in order to ensure that they don't go any further, we need to be in a position to deter after the war. Right now, I think the efforts being put into Ukraine at the operational level in terms of weaponry is at a fairly minimum level. I've always argued that we needed to have been far quicker, far more, far faster 1 or 2 years ago. But anyway, look, what's done is done. That's the best I can do.
And for Ukraine, well, Ukraine will be after that. Well, of course, the outcome, the victory of Ukraine, the hostilities stopped. What is the aftermath for Ukraine?
I'll just deal with that in two respects. Ukraine, I suspect, will also be far stronger. It will be in a position to rearm with Western NATO assistance. And again, that process should be considered now. I think we are beginning to do so with the introduction of longer-term agreements with Western countries for platforms like F16s, armour and ammunition and so forth. So Ukraine will gradually NATOize. What concerns me rather more, though, is the humanitarian aspect, with the huge damage done, the thousands of missing people, the need to reconstruct those towns and cities that have been obliterated or seriously damaged. And of course, most importantly, I don't need to say this to any of your viewers, so I'll just mention it only this, the eternal consequences of hundreds of thousands of dead, seriously injured civilians and soldiers. It will be the biggest task, I think, well, certainly since 1945, and maybe even before then, to rebuild your shattered country.
Thank you so very much for your answer. Let us speculate a bit. Frank Ledwidge, NATO Secretary General. What will be your first decision, sir?
Right, well, this is where I probably diverge from many of your viewers. My priority as NATO Secretary General, of course, is to defend the integrity of the alliance, and I think it's fairly strong at the moment. Rather more importantly is to defend or rather prevent the escalation of the war to something that cannot be controlled. And that would include, of course, but not be confined to, escalation up the ladder leading to nuclear use initially by Russia. Those would be my priorities. I don't think those priorities are shared, by the way, by the current leadership, who seem to be rather cavalier in this respect.
Oh, yeah. Do you personally believe that Putin is going to go nuclear?
No.
Thank you very much.
The triggers for that will be not in place, and the triggers would be, I think, would be Western combat soldiers in action in Ukraine. I think all the rest of it is threats and saber rattling.
All right. Well, what do you think of Donald Trump? Is my last question for this conversation.
Again, I diverge from the majority on this in Western Europe anyway. I would say that Donald Trump did not start any wars. He is capricious. I do not believe that if Trump were in power, this war would have started, as Putin could not possibly predict what might have happened. If he's elected again, however, it's a different matter, because we can't predict what he will do. Yeah. And I was talking to somebody only last few days who knows about this kind of thing, who said, well, don't believe that Ukraine is in any way finished if Trump comes to power. You may find that he takes the view that he doesn't like, on the day he makes a decision, he disapproves of what Putin has done and makes a decision, for example, to go beyond the current NATO commitment or US commitment. That is by no means impossible. I can see him doing that. We don't know, though, do we?
No, we don't. That was the reason why I was asking. I was just interested in what were you going to say. And thank you so very much again for your time and for your expertise. And please promise to educate me and my audience, our audience in Ukraine, more on the, in terms of military ethics. This is the very interesting question that I would like to discuss with you anytime soon when you have time for that.
With a very great pleasure, a great honour.
Thank you so very much, and hope to see you soon with us at UATV English.
Thanks very much indeed. Good luck to everyone.
Goodbye.
Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava. He was an expert in many things, but military capabilities, history, torture prevention, and Air Force Dr. Frank Ledwidge from Royal Air Force College. Thank you so very much, and stay tuned for more on UATV English.